So today is all about predictions for 2026. So what lies ahead for our sector? What are the opportunities and challenges? And what are the skills we need to stay relevant? So it's certainly true to say, I would argue, that times are much more turbulent than ever. So every time I read the news, it's clear that I would say the most powerful person on the planet has thrown their traditional rule book away, and you never quite know what's going to happen when you open up the news. Here in the UK, the two-party system is looking weaker than ever, and many of you, I know, are dealing with budgets that continue to be cut and ever dwindling resources. And of course, many of you, especially if you work in local government, will be dealing with local government reorganisation. So it is a very uncertain time at the moment, but we do want to focus on the positives as well as the challenges. So just in terms of the usual housekeeping stuff, do put any questions that you have in the chat as we go along. The session will be recorded and it will be available on the Chartered Institute of Public Relations website if you wish to collect CPD points, and it's a good time to do that. So what I'm going to do in a second is ask each of the panel to introduce themselves, and then we're going to go into questions. So got a number of questions already, but feel free, anything you want to ask the panel, do ask away in the chat. Okay, so I'm going to ask everyone to introduce themselves. So I think, Matt, are you okay if I'm going to go in order as I can see you on the screen. So Matt, are you okay to say hello first?
Yeah, of course. Thanks, Dominic. Hi, everybody. I'm Matt Geer. I'm head of the London office for a communications consultancy called Social. My background prior to joining Social is in the public and charity sectors. So I spent just over a decade working in-house in various comms and engagement roles in local authorities and in housing associations, but cut my teeth in agency many moons ago now. So yeah, excited to join with you all today and to talk about predictions for 2026.
So back in the world of agencies.
That's right,
Amanda.
Hi everybody. I just want to say before I start, I'm really loving some of the answers already to your question, Dom, in the chat. There's quite a lot of hope and positivity in there, so I quite like that. I'm Amanda. I'm the most senior comms and engagement person at University Hospitals Plymouth, down in the far southwest. It's been a bit rainy since January. We are a £1 billion organisation and we've got about 12,000 staff, so it's a big job. I've previously worked in police comms, in local government comms, and was also a journalist. More recently, I have a Masters of Science in Behaviour Change Psychology, and I have recently become a trustee for a charity, which I think is a really great thing to do for senior comms people. It's a charity that's close to my own heart because it provides support for people with learning disabilities and autism, and I have a sister with Down syndrome and a son with autism, so I really feel like I'm giving something back, but I just wanted to share that because I think it's really good for people in senior comms roles to look to do that.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for sharing that, Amanda, and it'd be great to hear about your experiences of your day job and also what you know from your masters around behavioural science, which will be exciting to delve into further. And last but by no means least, Sagar.
Hi everyone, so I'm Sagar Sharma. I'm the head of comms, public affairs and events at Wandsworth Council. I was at Hounslow Council before that, and that was the start of my local government career, but I was director of policy and comms at Barnardo's nationally before that, and did 19 years, gosh, in central government, various departments, latterly number 10 in central government. I, like Matthew, started my career in agency, Webber's Chandler Worldwide, just before getting into government. And yeah, just a thank you to Dominic for keeping us on our toes and keeping us learning, something I absolutely don't do enough of, and we are always learning, never learned. So thank you, Dom, for having us.
And thank you. It's great to have a panel with such a strong and varied career and kind of, I suppose, background. So it'd be really good to tease out lots of what's going on in the world today and what everyone's predictions are. So Going to kick off with the first question, which is all about the changing roles of communications professionals. So if you saw recently, CIPR's State of the Profession research in 2016 highlighted that 72% of PR professionals said they were engaged in media relations as part of their role. Today, that figure has dropped to 32%, demonstrating the growing breadth of activities undertaken when working in public relations. So what I want to ask each of you on the panel is, are you seeing this, and what do you think of the role of the communications professional is today? Matt, I'm going to go to you first again.
Yeah, of course, no worries. Thanks, Dominic. I think just to go back to that 2016 point, so reflecting on that back in 2016, which feels like a very long time ago now, I was in a role for a national charity where my job title was PR and publicity officer, and that role kind of did what it said on the tin. 60 to 70% of my role was focused on PR, media relations, and actually within the wider comms team of about 10, there was a separate social media officer, a separate marketing officer, a separate officer for internal communications. 10 years on, I'm not so sure that all of those roles would be separated. And in fact, from the state of the nation now, I think there's a lot more integration, there's a lot more generalization. But what does that mean for in terms of the day-to-day for comms professionals? From my perspective and what I've seen over the last 10 years, the core principles of what makes a good comms professional, the attention to detail, the passion for strategic thinking, being a problem solver, those things still remain, but the disciplines that you work across may be much more integrated than before. And I guess with that comes the need to be significantly more agile as a comms professional, being much more resilient, I think, for want of a better word, to change, and a willingness to learn probably at a higher rate of pace than previous generations. And I think that's the thing that stands out most to me, and looking ahead to 2026 is that willingness to learn, that shaping a culture of curiosity. There's so much change happening. Technology has significantly changed how we deliver the core disciplines within our profession, and so with that needs to come an increasing hunger for practitioners to learn more and to make that part of their day-to-day, not something that people kind of bolt on at the end of the month as part of their CPD, as part of their one-to-one. It's the living breath of how we operate as comms pros.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point around technology and that kind of changing what's happening. I think especially what you said, Amanda, in your blog with around predictions for the year ahead, about everyone's a content creator, and in a world where you've got AI, everyone can create content, so there's going to be content saturation. So what are you seeing, Amanda?
So I think that makes the value of curious questions, picking up Matt's point about shaping culture of curiosity, about curious questions and critical thinking, even more important. So in a world where lots of people can create content and lots of people can do things, I think our role is going back to actually asking those questions about why, who do you want to reach, what do you want them to do, who are you co-producing with, whose attitudes and behaviour do you want to change, and why and how, and what might be your mechanisms for doing that, and have you spoken to them about that, and do you know what drives them at the moment, etc. So I think all of that is really, really important. And I think that value of being able to stop, and I always think some of my job now, even now, and I really hear what Matt says about how much our roles have changed, but some of my job now is about asking some simple basic questions that nobody has really articulated before when you're thinking about doing something or embarking on change, etc. And I think that's really valuable. But in terms of for the next year, one thing that's really been playing on my mind recently is the Edelman Trust Barometer, which says that only 14% of people believe the next generation will be better off. And I think that's a bit of a sad indictment on hope. And I think if you look a bit deeper into some of that Edelman research, it suggests that people do still trust their employers, their co-workers. And I think there's something about us as brokers of trust in that space, and trusted voices, and creating really things that are real and times for people to connect. One of my phrases is, people don't want more content, they want more connection. So I think there's something around that. I think there is something about us being advisors and gatekeepers around content. So that thing about just because you can doesn't mean you should. So there's things like accessibility standards. Some of what my team do a lot of is say, yes, your poster looks great, but nobody can read that, or that looks great, but it's inaccessible for people using a screen reader online, etc. So there's lots of things that I think that we will be doing in that space. I've already started to support colleagues around deep fakes, and I think that will be true whether you're in agencies supporting organisations, etc. I think we're going to see a rise of that. I think there's something around moving from SEO to GEO and what drives AI visibility. And I think there is some work from Hard Numbers, I think, that did some research that suggested that earned media is still a big driver of what AI returns in its search function. And if that's true, maybe the age of media relations is not quite dead. So yeah, those are some of the things I'm thinking about, but I'm sure there's many more things that I haven't thought about that by this time next year I'll be saying, oh, didn't see that coming.
And it's great to see that the points you're both echoing already, it's very much it chimes with what people are saying in their comments around communications being more strategic, around tackling disinformation, about trust, about humanising. All those kinds of themes are coming out from what you've both said and what's in the comments. Saga, let's turn to you next.
So yeah, it's a super interesting question. I always tell people in the pub, usually a cheap pub around the corner, that I used to eat in the Ivy when I was 22 in my first job, because I had a corporate credit card from PricewaterhouseCoopers. And why did I have that? Well, because I could take journalists out to lunch, and I had to get them to cover like pensions products and mergers and acquisitions and dead boring stuff, like get it into the FT. And how did you do that? Well, you just took journalists out to lunch, and they wrote stuff for you, and there was a finite amount of media shaping public opinion, and they knew that that corporate credit card would be paid back multiple times on the bottom line. And fast forward a long time, God, I won't even count the years. I was saying to the guys earlier on the panel, I tried to get hold of the Wandsworth Times, right? It's a proper thing, print publication, ends up in libraries and stuff. That eventually found the editor on email, tried for 6 months to get hold of him, eventually did, made an appointment, it got cancelled. He had no interest in meeting the head of comms at Wandsworth Council because he uses AI to produce an entire newspaper that plucks from all around the world. There is no, like, local journalism is properly dead unless it's that clickbait London local democracy reporting, which is there. So, you have got the Reuters Institute of Digital News saying that trust in news has stabilized globally at around 40%, but the UK is particularly bad in the overall picture there. So people do consume traditional media, and Amanda, that's probably where the AI is picking up, where the reliability factor is coming in. So there is still a role. But if we look at the trajectory between 1998 corporate credit cards and Mr. Simon at Wandsworth Times, it's a downward spiral. So where do we go with this? So we've got to think about that. We've got to think about what that means for media relations. We've also got to think about where we stand and what our own credibility is as public institutions. OECD survey on trust in public institutions show that only a quarter of people say they trust national government, and political parties and parliaments are amongst the least trusted institutions. But what's the pivot? Where's the positive? Where's the light at the end of the tunnel? So, and this is what I want to talk about a little bit, and that is trust in other people has increased depending on who they are. So we are now shifting from channels to sort of the newsfluencers on the channel. So even when people are consuming mainstream news, they're usually accessing that through someone that they trust, or a channel that they trust that has people that they trust on it, that then serves up some sort of segue into international media. So I think what I'm saying is there's a pivot. We were constantly told to go where where people go for their information, not to try to create our own channels. I think that's now evolved into people don't really trust channels either, but they do trust certain people to make sense of the world for them and to interpret information for them. And who those people are and how we relate to them is, for me, the new PR environment, and should be a mainstay of how we're working at work. Significant change, though, for the way we organize ourselves as teams, but I don't think we're there.
Yeah, I'm just going to bring Amanda in on that point, if that's okay, just because I just want to explore what you're saying about trust a bit, and also looking at Dean's point from Ashford about misinformation and disinformation, and quite a few points in the chat around trust as well. And I suppose, Amanda, I wanted to kind of ask you specific as well in behavioural terms, what you're seeing in terms of how you build trust with audiences, with communities, and what you can do today to build that trust and why it's so important.
Okay, so I think that's a really, really good question. We know that there are some basic things in terms of trust. The more that you see people, the more that you see people's faces, the more familiarity actually helps breed trust. And that's because our brains are wired to look for threats. And so something that we see more often becomes more familiar and more trusted. And I think that really, really ties into my main point that I want to make here, which is, building trusted relationships takes time and it takes effort, and it's no good just to going out and seeing people. You have to listen to them. You have to take on board what their lives are like, experience that with them. And then if you can affect change or do something different for them, you need to play that back. And I think those skills are really important. And I think it's great. And I love asynchronous communications, and I love LinkedIn, and I love WhatsApp, and I love all of those things. But nothing actually for me beats going and seeing people and spending time with them. And obviously I work in a hospital where our patients and the people that we serve are here every day, but we also serve our community in a preventative way. And so we have patient counsellors, young persons patient counsels, and it's just about going and listening. And we have a fantastic young persons patient counsel here, and always amazed at how enthusiastic and hopeful those young people are and how much they want to be involved in change. So for me, trust is about spending time with people and really doing what you say you will do, but also listening. I think listening is a much underrated skill. To listen really, really well is truly a skill, and it's something that I've spent quite a bit of time working on, and I'm still not great at it, but I think listening well is important, and I think that's how you build trust.
Yeah, and it's often forgotten that if you want to build trust, you've got to start there. So Matt, I'm going to come to you in a second and carry on with the point around trust. And then I'll come to you after that, Saga. And there was a question about if colleagues are moving off X, if you want to have a think about that for the moment, Saga. And Matt, do you want to talk about trust? And also what you're seeing, because you're from an agency, so it'd be good to kind of get a sense of, I suppose, what the biggest challenge is that your clients face and how you're helping them to solve that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think if I am from an agency perspective, and then I'll go back to the trust point. So from an agency perspective, at Social, we serve a range of clients across public and private sectors, across 4 offices in Manchester, Leeds, Liverpool and London. And we work with everyone from housing associations to local authorities to small charities. But the one trend that we are seeing at the start of 2026 is that we are being asked by our clients to do more with less, as they are being asked to do more with less, or the same with less. But the focus on delivering outcomes over output still remains. And how that pertains and how we work more creatively and much more agilely as an agency is that we really need to be an extension of our clients' teams to help them on that journey. And in terms of feeding off Amanda's point around trust, one of the other things that definitely was a big part when I worked in house as a head of comms and marketing was about going directly to the source and being, open and engaged with your communities, with your tenants, with your residents, whatever those core audiences are, to actually work with them to co-produce content, and doing that in a true sense of the word, not where you go to a meeting or a town hall with a pre-agreed agenda and deliverables that you'd like to get out of that, but being bold enough and willing enough to sometimes go with a blank sheet of paper and say, actually, we think the problems are this, but we don't know. Please tell us what you think the problems are with whatever it may be, you know, rent setting or council tax or whatever it might be, and then worked collaboratively to shape comms and make a difference and convey change in a meaningful way. And that does take time. And I think, I can't remember if it was Amanda or Saga who mentioned earlier about giving space and breath you know, to communicate that change, but being willing enough and being patient enough and having the buy-in organisationally to say, well, actually, if we are going to co-produce this campaign with residents, what would have taken traditionally, you know, a 2-month window might need to take 4 months, and that's okay, because to build that trust with that audience will take time, and it will pay off dividends in the future. And I think it ties into that other point that we mentioned earlier about authenticity. You know, the challenges of AI and how it's changing our sector. The need for authentic storytelling, authentic communications has never been greater. So actually, by putting a bit more effort or focusing some more time into those areas where you can do, really does make a difference. And I think that's the thing that resonates most to me.
And I think we'll come back to the points around. I've just seen a comment about, I hate the phrase more with less from Neil Hopkins. I think all of us hate that phrase and have heard it way too many times. So we'll come back to that. And to in the meantime, Saga, I'm going to go to you and have a little chat about X and social media in general. So what are you seeing in terms of, are people coming off X? What's happening in the world of social media?
So yeah, so hopefully I can be really pithy on this one, because I just asked the other directors of comms across London what they were doing on this, and I think, look, it's an immoral platform, but it's necessary for public information, as long as there are people who are accessing things in a speedy way, and that is their channel that they're on, for better or for worse, to get that information. Then you still need it for emergency comms, for crisis comms, for any essential service information. You do that, but most of London is now councils are now dialing down on anything other than that, until such a time as the tipping point arrives where they can, which is what everybody wants to do, ditch the thing and move on to other sources of information. So that's what my policy will be on X, probably in pre-election period now, to kick off in the next local authority term, because politicians might not have it otherwise, but they will take advice beyond that. So that's where I am with X.
What you've seen, Amanda, in the world of health and the NHS?
Yeah, definitely a shift away from X. It's really a crisis comms channel, I think, a reactive channel should we need it, and that's how most people are holding it. I suppose the other thing is as well, sometimes there are things that our colleagues will report to us are on social media, and if you're not on those platforms, it can make it harder to search. But we were just reflecting as a team this morning how much that landscape has changed in a few years. For example, the rise of LinkedIn professionally, the rise of Facebook groups. I actually wonder, Saga, whether some local community Facebook groups might be more effective in the time of crisis comms than X. I know recently where I live, there's lots of building work going on in the community, and it's taking out electricity every so often. And the first place I go to is my community group. And so I wonder whether local Facebook groups are starting to take up some of that space. I wonder that.
So, could you want to just come in on that? I'll see your hand.
Yeah, sorry, and partly to answer Charlie's question in the chat as well. So, you know, what are the alternatives? And a lot of people think that blue sky is the alternative, but that's the point. At where we're operating now, we trust. It's not just about newsfluencers who are kind of semi-famous people. It's about your WhatsApp admin on your street. It's about the chair of your safer neighborhood group. It's about your Somali community leader who does loads for the community off his own back and happens to have a WhatsApp network that he sends voice messages to in Somali, having read council information. It's about creating a special group of people. I call it community communications. And actually, that is exactly my sell to the leader of the council, is let me free up capacity in the team to build up our community communications model so that we can ditch Facebook, we can ditch X, And he loves that. That's music to his ears, because of course that's fantastic for making him look good amongst his voters as well. So so community communications is a thing that I think Callum's on the call, wonderful chap, Hounslow, but we're, you know, starting in Hounslow, bringing it in Wandsworth now after the election. So that's something I think around the trust model that is very, very important to replace these big toxic channels.
Definitely. I'm going to bring you in, Matt. I'm just been scanning the comments. So yes, as you picked up on, there's a question about the best alternative to X. Comment about Facebook groups been really, really good. And certainly where I am, if there's a crisis, everyone goes in the local Facebook group to see what's happening. Some comments around WhatsApp as well, again, which is certainly really useful as a trusted channel. Matt, what would you like to add?
I think the only thing to add from my perspective is also it's the yes and question. So the need to convey information on, you know, really important topics for your organisation, whether it be a council, a local authority, you know, whatever it might be, housing association, remains. But actually being really strategic and being really segmented in how you convey that information is important. I think one of the things that it reminds me of is when I worked back at a housing association where we had a significant amount of residents over the age of 65 living in sheltered accommodation or extra care homes. Just at the end of the pandemic, we were conveying a lot of information about changing of rules, changing of processes, and we would spend a lot of time segmenting across all of our digital channels. But actually, it took engaging with a resident housing manager for them to say, well, actually, for 65% of our residents living in this extra care scheme, they don't engage in any of those platforms. And in all of that, we missed a really obvious trick of maximizing the use of really traditional means of communication, digital notice boards, face-to-face communication, and conveying it in a way that would resonate most with that audience, but also not only just with that audience, but also thinking about their communities and where those trusted voices were. And actually what it ended up with is some really targeted comms to the children of the parents who were living in these extra care homes to convey the information that we needed on our behalf. And it took time, it took a bit of creativity, but it was the willingness to say, yes, we need to do this, and we also could go a little bit further and be a little bit more creative, even if that means taking a step back and doing things slightly more creativity, you know, than we would have done previously. So yeah, that was just a point from my view.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Sagar, I'm just going to bring you in. I want to touch briefly again on that, I suppose, kind of doing the more with less, because it is a horrible phrase and we all hear it all the time, and it's not a great phrase. But I think that's the predicament that we're in as communicators. We are faced with ever dwindling budgets and doing more with less. So want to explore that a bit more and how you kind of demonstrate the value of communications. And then Amanda, I'm going to turn to you after this. There's a comment in the chat about the kind of flu vaccine and trust and anti-vaxxers, which is a really interesting comment. So it'd be good to get your views on that in a second, Amanda. But Sagar, do you want to talk just a little bit about that, kind of how you demonstrate the value of communications in the face of ever-dwindling resources?
So I'm old enough to be around in the department that came up with that phrase. It was better for less, actually. It wasn't more with less. It was better for less through efficiencies. Yeah, and it's a horrid idea, isn't it? I think I come back to let's be positive, the opportunities presented by a rapidly changing information environment, by the shift from channels to trusted networks. Because trusted networks are a bit like volunteer networks. You know, they are people that if you tap them in the right way, they don't ask you for money. They want recognition. They want to add value. There is a whole thing about Gen. I can't remember what Gen it is because I've lost track of the gens. But the last time I did a big piece of expensive research, it was saying that people of a certain generation, like younger than me, probably 30 downwards, they're much more interested in how they can socially contribute and social value than they are even in income and money. And some of you might laugh at me, but this was what the research said. Now, how do you therefore do better for less in that context? Well, it is coming back to that community communications bit a little bit, but it's about micro partnership marketing. Make partners through your network. Call them micro influencers, call whatever you want to name the discipline. It's a form of partnership marketing where you find common ground, you find common cause, you find common values, and you build a network of people who are more trusted, more networked, more engaged in the people you're trying to reach than you could ever hope to be. And that trajectory will only get more stark as you move forward. So it's not even a, ooh, that's a good idea. It's a, if you don't do this, you will be irrelevant. So it better for less, it will cost you less, but it will require much greater openness, a completely different way of thinking about the kind of paternal relationship between public institutions and the people that they serve. You've got to ask people for permission to get alongside them and build a trust where they think, you know, the council's actually good. They're doing good things on this, on X, Y, and Z. They're doing good things. I'm going to get alongside them and I'm going to help them for free. And I think that is what we need to do.
Yeah,
my mouse. Sorry.
And I think keeping on the theme of trust, I'm going to come to you, Amanda. The comment about the Lorna who put a flu vaccine video up with a mother whose child was hospitalised after flu caused a seizure. I just picked up on this story because it's it's quite sad about how she had to take it down after 24 hours because of all the negativity. So sorry to hear that and the anti-vax conspiracy messages, and it got quite personal. So what I wanted to ask you, Amanda, is I suppose how do you kind of deal with that negativity? Now I'll come to you as well about this, Matt, in a second, but how do you kind of deal with those, and you've touched on it already a bit with the neuroscience, where people have very entrenched views that are very difficult to move? How would you deal with that?
So first of all, I just want to say to Lorna, you're not alone. I think my team have been reporting the same to me when posting on social media. I think a little bit less this year, actually more last year. So we've actually found, for example, in our staff vaccination, we've had an uptick this year compared to last year. So I think we've seen a little bit less of it this year, but I know where you are. We have felt your pain. So there's some stuff around behavioral psychology around actually now the way to tackle misinformation and disinformation is trying to pre-bunk things. And I think there's a lot of value in that pre-bunking, but that doesn't help you, does it, in the moment when you've posted something and you're getting lots of these comments back. And I think then there is something about holding true to what you've tried to post. Sometimes when we share some of our patient stories, we know that they might attract some really negative comments. So we manage the comments differently. So we often hide comments. We will often we might encourage some other patients to start off with some really positive comments to show appreciation. So you can help shape the comments, the type of comments that you get back sometimes. So I think I'd be looking at your house rules for your Facebook page and what you can do in that circumstance, because ultimately what you've done there is tried to share a really, really personal experience with really good intent to try to positively influence behaviour. And I think it's so sad that you had to take it down. So I'd be looking at maybe, if it was my team, if you're in my team, about how we could manage some of those Facebook comments, so we didn't actually have to take that person's shared experience down. And I just want to say well done for you for doing it. And it's not easy, and it's really horrible when you've worked with somebody, isn't it, to do that and put them out there and then that happens. So yeah, I'd really have a little bit of a think, but I'd probably be tempted, with their permission, to try and repost it and manage those comments in a different way. Does that answer, Dom?
Yeah, it does. No, that's great. And I think it's a difficult one. And I remember working in a housing association where there was a lot of negativity on social media. And I think the interesting thing was we ended up focusing very much on the welfare of the staff as well, and thinking, how could we support people particularly if you're dealing with a lot of negativity, which is something that can be overlooked, but it's definitely in many ways the most important thing, thinking about the kind of welfare for your staff. Matt, do you want to come in on this one at all?
Yeah, I'm happy to come in on this. I think it reminds me of, back in 2020, which feels like a very long time ago now, I was in a local authority in London, leading the comms team that was delivering a specific bit of comms around COVID. And it, not to spend too much time on it, but one thing that we saw a lot of it over that sort of 2-year window was the impact on the psychological safety of our own comms and engagement team, of asking a bunch of professionals who were really good at their job but were working remotely, and being asked to convey such a humongous rate of information, very complex information on really challenging subjects, and then the amount of negativity they faced back in return, and that they digested on a daily basis, really impacted them. And on a human level, how did we had to shape better practices as a team to support each other and support those particularly more junior colleagues. And I think those things remain true now 6 years on. And whether it's about flu vaccinations, whether it's about service charges, whatever it might be, the impact of seeing negativity on the work that you're delivering and working really hard on day in, day out can't be overlooked. And I think it's our responsibility as comms leaders, but also reflecting back on the fact that there are now comms pros entering the sector or progressing within the sector who were students pre or during the pandemic, and how does it impact them as they navigate the world of being a comms pro. So I think there are lots of different avenues you can take to that. But I think one of the things that we've really seen work in the teams that I've worked in the past is creating that space at the start and the end of the week to just breathe together as a team, short windows of time, 15, 20 minutes, just to debrief on a human level of how has the week been. You've had to deliver a campaign about this, which received a lot of negative feedback. How are you dealing with that? How are you coping? Can we support you? And being, ultimately being really human. And that's, as we think about the way that technology will make us more efficient, how AI could make us more efficient as comms pros, that's something that you can't replicate. Having that human connection with your team who are delivering, really tough messages in tough times, and sometimes receiving challenging feedback back.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point about how you use techniques to manage your well-being and use that in your teams. And it would be a good topic for a future webinar. I'm also going to pick up on AI. So there was one comment in the chat about AI reshaping the work that we do in comms teams. So what I started to discuss with all of you is how AI is helping. So what opportunities are there? What are the things we need to watch out, and where it's kind of actively hindering what we're doing? So who wants to kick off with some thoughts on all things AI?
You want me to go?
Okay, yeah. Do you want to go, Sagar?
Yeah, so I think it's amazing and scary all in equal measure, but I think we've just got to kind of think in leapfrog terms about where are we going to be and what's the inevitable, and how do we, in the greater good, as people who are on the side of trusted information and accurate information, how are we going to position ourselves in the future? So the Government Communications Service very early on published a guide to using AI and said you must do it. You must use AI. You must use it sensibly. Obviously, don't misrepresent yourself. Obviously, be clear where you've used it and how, but get involved. And it's one of those areas that's moving so quickly that one of the questions was, how do you upskill in this environment? And you've got to learn by doing. So you've got to do it. My personal thing at the moment, just to keep a clear blue water between me and a reputable public institution, because we're not the same thing, believe it or not, is to do something good. So I've started a sort of social enterprise, and I'm going to use AI legitimately to promote that social enterprise because it's completely declared. And I'm looking at, well, how do I do little animations, and how do I drive traffic and do quick videos? And so I'm doing something on the side. And sort of the generations younger than me certainly are all about the side hustle. So it's about what's the side hustle that could also build your AI skills and contribute back into your career understanding of how to use AI. And then I can tell you your organizational policy will change to be much more permissive over time. Once the ethics framework develops and kicks in, we cannot be left behind as public institutions. So they will have to change. So get ahead of your skill set and use it to its full capability so that you can then bring that back into the work environment that is now permitting it to happen. Don't wait for that to happen in order to learn, because you'll be the last person with the last set of skills, and that's no good for anyone.
And that's a really good point. I think it's the thing that it's like, will AI replace my job? No, it won't replace my job, but someone who understands AI will replace me. Amanda, what you see? Because I know you've talked a lot about AI. I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
So I am deeply fascinated by AI. I think I'm fascinated on a philosophical level about whether it can really think or whether as large language models, it is just a prediction model. I'm really, really fascinated. I really agree with Sagar. Look, you learn by doing, you've got to play around. And I think I have a sense that like social media, we won't soon be talking about AI. We will be talking about, actually, I really like using Claude because, or I don't like Copilot, or I really like ChatGPT. And I think they're horses for courses. I really like Claude for a more ironically, given what I've just said, kind of more thinking model. I definitely am not a fan of Copilot in terms of image generation. I love the way Adobe has used generative AI in its software. So I really like this. I have to say, married to somebody with a computer science degree as well. So this is something we do talk about at home. I really just agree with Saga. You just can't be left behind. I think AI has got some really great potential. If it is the most fantastic prediction model ever to help us in terms of understanding, for example, of me in my role today, I'm sitting just above our emergency department to better understand and predict what types of people are going to come in at what time, at what times, with what kinds of condition, and then what's the best type of treatment we can have for them. And so I see really, really how that could be used in medicine, in reading scans, in supporting radiology and radiologists to read scans, I think, and diagnostic capability. I think there's really great power for it. But I also do worry. I sit on a national group looking at NHS, the AI ethics in NHS comms. And I'm also aware I sit in a massive organisation that is a really big employer in our area, that is a massive spend in our area. So it has a really big influence on the local economy. And as an anchor organisation, what is the impact of using some AI? And I think the other question that I was listening to Stuart Lee last night, and he was talking about AI, and somebody was saying they'd just done some searches on him, and he was saying you could have just looked at Wikipedia and it would have taken much less energy from the planet. So I think there's that sustainability issue. But I really am 100% with Saga. I like playing with things. I like testing things. There are some fantastic Harvard free AI courses you can do at the moment, which I'm finding really interesting. It is the future, and the more you know, sometimes the more you know, you don't know. But I think it is really interesting, and I am definitely somebody that is trying to encourage my colleagues to look at it and see how it can help them with, dare I say, some of the tasks that we don't like doing. So I use it for research a lot, and I've got in my personalization, always cite sources. I don't want a positivity bias. Don't tell me stuff that you're not sure of, etc., etc. Hope that answers.
Yeah, and I think it's such a great tool, isn't it, to help with some of the mundane things. And I was speaking to someone yesterday at a conference who was saying that actually what you can do is if you put your tone of voice into something like ChatGPT, that can help you do things like drafting emails, and my partner uses it all the time. Obviously, it doesn't always work, but it is really good for saving time. Matt, what are you seeing in your agency and with the people you work with?
Well, so I'll split from an agency perspective, and I'll also give a personal reflection as well. And I'll start with from an agency perspective. So, talking to colleagues across the business as we're shaping our AI policy, and we're having increasing requests from clients about how we're using AI. You know, the ethics point is really at the top of the agenda for a lot of them. Is actually, you know, looking around your organization and learning from colleagues who may have a slightly different experience. And it comes back to that culture of curiosity. I was having a conversation with one of my slightly more junior colleagues who has only recently joined the agency a couple of years ago, and she was talking about how she used AI whilst in uni in 2022 or 2023, I believe, to help her do some research for a dissertation, and gave me this really great story of how it helped her become much more efficient. And she leaned into it to kind of explore all these different topics, which, to be honest, and frankly, with my mid-30s brain, didn't really have much of an understanding of at the time. But that colleague is now on our AI working group and is driving things forward on an organizational level, and is far more probably curious than I am, but is challenging me day to day to say, well, actually, Matt, have you thought about how you could use Copilot differently in your day-to-day job? And so I think it comes back to that point of, you know, notwithstanding all of the ethics points that we obviously know is really important, is having that culture of curiosity. Sagar's point about, you know, using it for a side hustle is really important, but also, you know, learning from the next generation. And I guess the second personal reflection is I've got a almost 5-year-old son, and he's in reception at primary school, and the conversation of AI has come up in reception at primary school in a very loose primary school kind of way. But that is the next generation, or generation alpha, I believe, who are going to be much more bought in from day one in terms of using this. So I think it's about, you know, being forward thinking and future thinking, but notwithstanding the ethics point, and really seeing it for the positives that you can have while being used in a very thoughtful and mindful way.
That's great. Great points. I'm just going to come to you in a second, Amanda. There was a question in the chat from Neil about, would you say that social media has allowed different, multiple in-group identities to emerge rather than a homogenous whole, which fewer channels may have permitted? But before you answer that, I just wanted to say, if anyone does have any other questions, there's lots of comments, which is great, in the chat, and we will send around those 3 Harvard courses I think you mentioned, Amanda, because that sounds really, really interesting. So any questions you've got for the panel, do drop them in the chat and we'll come back to that. But do you want to come back to this question specifically, Amanda?
Actually, there was another question that I just hadn't addressed that I think I'd like to address, and that's about what it's doing to our minds. Sonia is saying about we also need to be mindful of what AI does to judgment and trust. And in my predictions on LinkedIn, I did share a piece of research that shows what's happening in your brain when you're using AI compared to a normal Google search. And I think overall it was shown that there was less activity, less brain system activity when you're doing that. And I think there is something about, you have to recognize when you're using it some of the superficiality of the way that you're engaging. So, for example, if I'm doing a systematic literature review myself and really reading the papers, I'm really understanding what some of those researchers have grappled with and maybe the limitations of their study. If I'm getting an AI summary, I'm missing all of that. So I think you just need to be mindful of when you're really digging deep yourself and when you want AI to do something for you, and just not use it all the time to do things. I think that's quite important for me. So that was just the first point I wanted to say. And then your second question, Dom, was about social identity, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm.
So and were you thinking it was about social media and social identity?
Yeah, so it was, would you say that social media has allowed different / multiple in-group identities to emerge rather than a homogenous whole?
Yeah, this is Tajfel, isn't it? And social identity theory, which has been around for a long time. So, you know, social media hasn't. So we've always had in-group identities and out-group identities. And I think, you know, if we could go back and look at early civilizations, we would see that too. I think what social media has done really is amplified that. So it is easier perhaps to find your tribe. And that might be really important for some people and might be really beneficial. So, for example, if you are neurodivergent, it might be really important to connect with people who are also neurodivergent and who and share your experiences. So that might be really positive. I think what the danger is, and I think Sonia said something about this earlier, is that when your identity and who you are and what you associate with becomes so entrenched that you can't connect to others with different views. And I think that's the danger. And that brings me right back to the Edelman Trust thing, because they talked about the age of insularity. And that's where our role as communications professionals, especially working with big organizations, you know, Matt as an agency working with big organizations, so Sagar or myself or you, Dom, that's our space, isn't it, to try to help to broker trust and get people talking to other people. I'm a great believer in actually finding, as Saga said, about common ground, common purpose, what binds us. And I think if you do that first, and if you say, actually, yeah, we all live in Wandsworth and we all want this, or we use this service or whatever, I think it's really important to find that common ground. And that's my worry about the divisions caused by social media sometimes.
Yeah, and I think that's true, isn't it, in the world at the moment, that we live in a world where I think I would say division, polarization, it's increasing, and it's something we've certainly touched on already. Saga, do you want to come in on that? I see your hands up.
Yeah, and Amanda very, very sensibly in our prep discussion said we must keep this positive. And it's hard when you talk about stuff like this, but I just want to say something about the demographic that really isn't represented on this call, and that is kind of people my daughter's age, 15. So we've just seen stuff come through Parliament now. It's filtered through to my school, my daughter's school. I've got a message back saying we're 100% banning smartphones in school now. There's no blind eye, there's no bottom of the bag. We will be enforcing this 100%. I then reached out to all the parents groups in my network to say, now we can do this together. It's going to be easier to have the conversation with our children about social media. And they're asking me, my daughter's coming downstairs and asking me, can you block this app? Can you block that? Almost in a state of panic, because they know that it's toxic out there. Why am I saying that in response to this? Because what I'm trying to say is there's hope in the next generation to self-police and to understand, as with any change journey, we've crashed into it because we thought that something published online is real, and so it started to affect our brain chemistry. They're growing up in a different way. They will handle social media in a different way, and hopefully we'll have school kids coming out of school who haven't been exposed to social media and smartphones. And so it's not completely hopeless. These echo chambers, what you hope will happen is they'll break down, and that we'll look back in history and we'll say, oh my gosh, 1990 to 2020 was a scary time for the breakdown of homogenous community thinking. And we can look back on that as a study rather than as a thing that we're worried about is going to destroy the world, because it could. So I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Lots to think about there. And I think I was at the CIPR conference, the communications conference, not that long ago, and there was a really interesting session by a neuroscientist there about the damage that mobile phones and screens are doing to our brain. And I knew that this was the case, but to kind of have it all laid out and that how good the research is now, it was really kind of shocking to sort of see. So immediately went home and told my kids all about it, who, as you would expect, didn't care. Matt, have you got anything you'd like to add?
It was just one quick one on the data point, and I hear you on the kids' point. Is the CIPR published a population report back end of last year, and whilst we have a long way to go in many areas, from a diversity perspective, I think it says that 44% of PR practitioners are aged between 16 and 34. I'm not sure exactly what that split is kind of in between each of those points, but thinking positively about what Sagar said about his daughter, there will be professionals coming into the sector relatively soon who are so much more au fait with this than maybe many of us are, and with that knowledge, I hope comes positivity and more creativity in how to use it much more part of their day-to-day in a much more ethical way. So I think there is a lot to be positive about, and I think we do need to look to that next generation for some of that inspiration as well.
And I think that's the thing. We're all leaders. All of us in the virtual room are leaders in our field. So we have that ability to help shape things in a positive way, which is it's an opportunity and a challenge at the same time. So there's a question that's just come in, so I'm just going to go to that in a second. But what I will say to the panelists, if there's anything in the chat that we haven't covered that you do want to pick up in a second, do let me know. But in the meantime, I'm just going to go into this question here, which is, I'm intrigued to hear the panel's thoughts about leaders managing cross-generational teams that can span from boomers to Generation Z, and in the next 3-4 years, Generation Alpha. How do you manage attitudes towards work, including AI?
Oh, I'll come in there if that's okay, Dom. I absolutely love that question. What a great question, Desiree. I am a leader of a multi-generational team, and there are lots of differences. And I'm just going to come back to what I said before. It's about what bonds us. Every morning we have a huddle at 9:15 and we talk about what's worked yesterday, what we've got coming up today, what tomorrow's issues are, etc. And it's what bonds us. And what I love is from all those multi-generations, we have different views, and they are sometimes really, really challenging. They are sometimes funny. Sometimes we will actually say as a team, we haven't got the answer to this. Let's have a go, have a think a little bit more, and let's go and talk to different people about this. We need to get their views. We need to do that. So I think, how do I manage a cross-generational team? But because we have a common purpose, there are some things that bond us in our team. We do simple things like everybody takes somebody else's birthday and bakes a cake, something simple, and organises the little celebration. So there are some rituals. I think rituals and routines are really underestimated. We pay attention to your rituals and routines. You know, our daily habit of meeting at 9:15. We always try and find something positive from yesterday to share, and somebody to highlight, things like that. So I think those rituals and routines are really important. But I'm also a mum to, like Sagar, I'm also a mum to teenage children, and they provide challenge, and that's good, because I hope that the next generation is more intelligent and more thoughtful and more considerate than myself. So I love the cross-generational stuff, and they are the younger people than myself are going to be our future. So I think they challenge us sometimes. They challenge me sometimes as well about what we do and why we do, and I have to have a rethink, and that's good.
I was going to say, my kids challenge me every day of the week, and it's great. I love being challenged by them, and it keeps you on your toes. I'm just going to drop something in quickly. So there's a neuroscientist who talks about kind of trust. So the sort of things we were talking about earlier, while I remember, I just wanted to drop that in so people have a chance to look at his stuff. It is worth looking at after this. Matt, I think you were about to say something, so I'm going to let you come in now.
That's okay, thanks, Tom. I think just to build on what Amanda's point, and I love the daily huddles. I think that works really well. Is also being mindful of the variety that your team needs to be successful in their roles. I think depending on where you work, we are working across really challenging topics, and often with interdisciplinary teams spending not a lot much time actually with your comms team themselves. So giving space to do things differently really can make a difference. So whether that be doing walking one-to-ones, if you know that someone prefers to have the space to decompress, or having walking team meetings, which we've started to do recently, which works really nicely once a week, weather permitting, not on a day like today perhaps. But also giving space for suggestion, and giving space for people to feel that they can bring things forward. I think what is coming out of this conversation today, there is so much that we're grappling with as an industry. We often don't give that much space to each other to bring their whole selves to work and say, actually, here's an idea that I think could work really, really well. And how do we adapt that? Are we giving ourselves enough breathing room in our day-to-day roles to make that happen? And if we aren't, then perhaps we need to take a look and think about how we do things differently. And I think outside of the conversation around AI, in terms of team cohesion, in terms of psychological safety, that cannot be something that we neglect as we look to 2026 and beyond.
Saga.
Yeah, I think Amanda and Matt nailed it really, because you talked about you talked about the diversity of the team, but you didn't use the word diversity. So there's this whole age diversity in that question. And I do think that the societies we serve as public institutions are living things, and then they're ever changing things. And one of the things that are ever changing is, of course, they're always renewing from the bottom up, right? That's what they're doing. Younger people are coming in. So age diversity is really essential to have in a team, and that's where that common purpose comes in. You have a common purpose to serve all your residents, and therefore those attitudes and perspectives in the team are equally valued. Although I have to say I have a bias towards younger people coming in, because I just think they bring so much, and I have learned so much from the next generation, who are just more respectful. They lead with love. We've had to learn as old-fashioned leaders to change. Well, I to change management style from quite a directive, hierarchical, like you don't get Gen whatever it is, I can't remember, to respond. If you do that, you have to earn their respect. You have to lead with love. You have to, you have to show them that you deserve their effort and their input, because they're not just in it for the traditional things that people used to join jobs for. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think it makes us all better leaders.
I think those are really good points, and couldn't agree more. And I think it's the style of communications now and of leadership is very different to say 5-10 years ago, and in a good way. So I've just had a question come in, so I'm going to ask the panel that one. So we've talked a lot on the call today about technological innovation. How do we ensure less digitally literature and older people are in an aging population are not left behind in our comms? And a very, very good question and segue. Matt, did you want to come in? You look like you're off mute, so I'll go to you first.
That's okay, thank you. I think it's a really good question. Thanks, Andy, for sharing. I think for me, it comes down to that initial point of how do we engage with them to help shape the solution. So I think one of the points, having worked at a housing provider before with a really significant over 65 population, was actually, let's go out and talk to these people. Let's engage with them where they feel safe, where they feel able to share, and ask them what their concerns are, ask them how they would like to be communicated with, and how do we bring them along in that journey, rather than sitting away in a comms team meeting thinking about how we can serve these communities without actually ever really engaging with them. That doesn't provide all of the answers, and it can take longer to get to the solution, but it's about being intentional, and ultimately it comes back to that point around authenticity. The best way to do it is actually to collaborate and be invested in these communities, and you can't do that first without spending time with them and asking them what really concerns them.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. I remember having a conversation with a comms professional recently, and she was saying that one of the most successful campaigns she did around building trust was just a long period of just listening to residents, just sitting with them and chatting to them and just having conversations and doing it little by little. Amanda, did you want to add anything on these points?
Well, I think that's a fabulous answer from Matt. Really good answer. I'm struggling with this at the moment because we are introducing an electronic patient record across all 3 hospitals in Devon, and I am the senior comms engagement person on the programme board for that. And part of that is about encouraging patient sign up of the app, and it's got some real benefits. So, you can walk out of the hospital with your next appointment, if you've got one, on your phone before, you don't need to wait for letters, etc., etc. But on my other hat, I am also chair of our digital citizen and inclusion group across Plymouth Health and Social Care. And this is a real challenge for us. And the way that we're approaching it is by getting the organisations, including our voluntary sector and charity organisations, together to do exactly as Matt says. They know those areas, those communities best. I work with a doctor who works with people experiencing homelessness and complex lives. So it's working with people in those communities and understanding them what might motivate them to use it if choice is the issue, and if it's not, and if it's cost. There was some good stuff the other day, I think, from Ofcom about barriers to internet use at home being around cost. So there's things like the Good Things Foundation. You can become a data hub at the hospital. We're a data hub, so you can give away free data. So there are looking at the barriers and the motivations to people using it, because sometimes it's choice and sometimes it's not. In a rural area, some of our rural areas, we found that we had higher non-attendance for virtual appointments in some areas that weren't suffering from economic deprivation, but they were suffering from technological deprivation because they didn't have good Wi-Fi access, etc. So it's really getting in and understanding with those different groups what actually are the barriers and how can you work with them.
Yeah, and I think that's the key point, isn't it? That I think there's a really good point here that some would say that some will be marginalised by technology, but equally we mustn't underestimate how many are right there with it. And I was at a recycling conference yesterday, and this point came up, and I think there were lots of people from app providers and people who run advertising who were saying that exact point, that yes, we do need to be mindful of how different people communicate, but often it's kind of just being clear on what the barriers are, what the solutions are, and what channels people consume or don't consume, and just matching it up. So you've got your audience and you work out, well, what is the actual picture in terms of where people are or not. So I'm looking at time and we're coming towards the end. So what I'm going to do is ask each of the panel just to close with some final thoughts. So just to think of, if there's anything in particular in the chat that hasn't been covered off at all, any points you want to raise about the future of 2026, so what's in store for the communications profession, what our opportunities are, what our challenges are, and what your kind of final reflections are going forward. So who would like to kick off? I think that's Amanda. Amanda's won the race to kick off.
So I think it was Charlotte that was posting at the start about hope, and I noticed the other day, I get up about 5:30 in the morning and do a few exercises and watch BBC Breakfast at the same time, and I noticed that they've got this programme called Rise and Shine, and what they're looking for is positive community stories about things that are positive and hopeful and happening all around the UK. And I think in these very uncertain, turbulent times, I think I wrote at the time I was writing my predictions, I wrote that when was the last time you heard one NATO country threaten another? And I think people are looking for positive, life-affirming examples, stories, and I think that we have a great role to play in there, because there is so much that we have, you know, in the UK today, and so much we benefit from and should be great, you know, can be grateful for and appreciate, and including each other. I think that's really important. And in my line of work, we were saying, weren't we, at our pre-meet the other day, what a privilege it is to grow old, actually. So some of those things that actually sometimes society is making us think are not great things are really, really good things. So, you know, I can walk around my hospital, I can leave this meeting now and go and walk around my hospital and see people with all sorts of challenges and difficulties, but I also see some amazing treatment, some amazing courage. In our maternity wing today, there will be babies being born, and I think it's really our role to help give hope and broker trust.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing today, that we're living much longer than 50, 100 years ago. So the quality of our life and the amount we live for, it's a very positive thing. Matt, did you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. And just to build on what Amanda said, and I think that's, you know, it's really powerful to hear you share that, Amanda. You know, people are looking for authenticity. We spent a lot of time talking about AI and the threats, the risks that it poses, as well as the opportunities. But regardless of what platform we use, in a year's time, there'll be a plethora of other platforms that deliver some of what Claude does or Copilot does that we haven't even scoped yet. But people are craving connection and authenticity, and I think we have a responsibility and a privilege, I would say, actually, as communicators, to be front and center of that, to tell compelling stories, to convey information in a way that connects people to the right information at the right time. And I guess with that comes the need for us to be even more agile as professionals, And there are a range of ways which we touched on today which can enable us to do that. But I think ultimately the other thing I want to finish on is the importance of shaping and cultivating community. We spent a lot of time thinking about community in terms of the audiences we serve, but also we are very, very much part of a community right now, obviously being on this webinar, but there are a range of other communities within the comms space which support different communities within our profession, which really do need to be invested more into. And I think there's thinking about how we can pour more time into that over the course of the year is something that I personally am taking forward as a challenge, whether that be being a mentor, whether that be reverse mentoring. And I think it's something that we can't neglect as we look ahead to 2026.
Yeah, and I think that's such a great point and such a positive point to end on, the fact that what we do is a privilege, and that's certainly something I'm going to take away from today. Sagar, you're on mute, Sagar.
Closing thought is unmute your mic before every time you try to speak.
You have to do it once on the Teams call, don't you?
Prediction for 2026, I'll get better at unmuting my mic. So I think closing thought from me then, public relations in 2026 won't be about, or comms won't be about controlling narratives. It'll be about earning permission to participate in narratives. So it's really about building trust with the gatekeepers early and really as a matter of priority in order to stay relevant. And I think that's the big thing for 2026. I think everybody else has done the really positive thing. I could post the greatest love YouTube into the chat. I'm tempted to do so. You can all listen to that and we can leave in a high, but I won't do that. You can Google it after, just as a reminder.
Thank you, Sagar. So completely lost my train of thought there. Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you so much to everyone for coming along, and yeah, it's been a great session. We could go on for hours, but we will call it a day there. And I think what's great is that you're clearly working with a lot of challenges. There's lots to do in the profession, more so than ever, but it's great to end on a positive note. So I think what you've just said in terms of summing up has been really positive and has given me hope for the future. So thank you so much to Matt, to Amanda, and to Saga, to all of you for coming along. This session has been recorded, so do share it with your teams, do share the positivity, and look forward to seeing you all at another event soon. Take care and have a good afternoon. Bye, everyone.